So Canon is putting new silicon into compact cameras. We've got affordable portrait primes finally showing up for the RF mount, and super telephoto glass that wildlife shooters have been watching for might actually get a serious update. So let's jump in. I'm Joseph Blake, professional photographer and videographer, and this is what happens when caffeine meets camera rumors. Now, if you felt storage prices creeping up, you are not imagining it. One of the biggest names in pro media says that the shortage is going to get worse and your next card purchase could cost more. Now, as Petapixel's reporting here, ProGrade Digital says that it will raise prices in May because the flash memory shortage has put too much pressure on its business. And that includes the cards and drives that a lot of working shooters rely on. The company flagged this months ago, back in December, when it said that it expected issues in 2026 and warned that there was a high potential for SSDs to hit a shortage. Now ProGrade is actually saying that the situation has deteriorated enough that it just can't hold pricing any longer. Now, ProGrade ties the root cause here to, surprise, AI data center demand. The company points out that only a few suppliers in the world run flash memory fabs, and those suppliers have been hit with intense demands for both flash memory and DRAM from companies building out their AI infrastructure. A key detail here is allocation. ProGrade says that memory manufacturers are prioritizing AI customers, and that pushes everyone into tighter supply and higher costs. And ProGrade doesn't describe this as a small bump. It says that memory makers have raised prices dramatically, in some cases with the increase being 100 to 200% reported in certain situations. When upstream costs move like that, it flows straight into the products that we buy every day. And ProGrade specifically calls out its SD cards, its CF Express Type A and B cards, and its SSDs as categories where it expects prices to increase. The other important part is timing here. ProGrade says that it doesn't expect memory prices to come down anytime in 2026. It also says that pricing pressure and allocation constraints will persist through the remainder of the year. ProGrade notes that it did not raise prices in April, but its costs are increasing significantly, so May is when it's going to make the move. There's also a second problem here that matters as much as price. ProGrade warns that availability is actually getting harder as well. The company says that products on the shelves are becoming more difficult to supply as things tighten across the industry. So even if you can stomach higher prices, you might still run into gaps where the exact capacity or speed class that you want is just harder to find. Now, this is one of those story types that hits almost every kind of creator because storage isn't just optional. If ProGrade is right about pricing staying elevated through 2026, then media is generally going to become a whole other area that you have to plan around, not just grabbing it last minute. Canon might actually finally start taking compact cameras seriously again, and that could change what a lot of people are going to be carrying every day. Daily Camera News says that Canon is lining up a real PowerShot comeback in 2026, with the first concrete details pointing at timing around late August, setting a lineup for Q4 and the holiday season. Now, the big takeaway here is going to be the focus. The chatter around these new PowerShots is not something like the PowerShot V1, and the emphasis sounds a lot more photographer first, even if video will still matter. Now, the most interesting part here is the sensor itself, because it hints that Canon is actually spending money where it counts in these cameras. The flagship model that's being discussed is rumored to get an all-new sensor, with the reporting framing it as new silicon rather than a recycled part from an older compact. The speculation centers around a 1-inch BSI stacked sensor, and the reason that people care about stacked sensors is simple. Fast readout can reduce rolling shutter. It can also improve burst performance, and it can make autofocus and processing feel a little bit more modern in real-time use. The same rumor thread says that new sensors would be smaller than the 1.4-inch sensor that Canon used for the V1, but more advanced in terms of architecture. To put that in context, Canon's current compact situation looks rather dated in a few places. The PowerShot G7X Mark III still sells at high prices in some channels. It also runs a 1-inch sensor that's paired with the older Digic 8 generation processor. Canon also tried an APS-C in a compact before. That was the G1X Mark III, but insiders are not expecting that idea to return. So if Canon lands on a modern 1-inch stacked sensor, it could be a practical kind of in-between, and it's going to keep the camera small enough to feel like a compact, but still modernize the performance without pushing pricing into like full frame territory. So let's talk about what models might actually show up. The rumor points to at least 2 cameras available at launch, possibly 3. One's described as a G7X successor, which would finally move that popular pocketable concept forward with a modern processor paired with what sounds like a fast constant aperture lens. Another is described as a super zoom, a power shot with serious reach aimed at wildlife shooters. The detail stands out is a pre-capture functionality for birds and more unpredictable action. The third is a mystery compact that sounds more like an affordable ELF style camera that's more for the mass market. The interesting thing is that when we got the V1, we heard about these potential zoom cameras and that we would get more power shots, but maybe the V1 just wasn't affordable and successful enough, and they're going back to the G7X, G7 style or H7 style labeling. Maybe that's the deal here. Pricing expectations are also important here because they tell you that Canon thinks that this is going to be for the $800 to $1,000 range buyer instead of the sub $500 entry-level pricing that we've seen in the past. That's going to fit the idea of bridging smartphones on one side with EOS R bodies on the other, and it also signals that Canon wants these to feel like real cameras with real capability and not just novelty point and shoots, which personally I think might actually be an example of Canon missing the mark here. I think people want something that is point and shoot friendly and inexpensive and cool and easy and cute, but not their phone. They want a separate device, and I don't think they want to spend $1,000 on it, but that's just me. Now, if Canon delivers a modern 1-inch stacked sensor compact with good handling and good autofocus, that could be what a lot of people do want. Late August is far enough out that this could still shift, but it's worth watching because Canon rarely telegraphs this kind of compact push unless something real is coming. Now, real quick, I get a lot of questions about gear, so I do keep a full gear list down below. It covers the cameras, lenses, audio, and accessories that I actually use. It's not just a wish list. These are links to products that I use here in the studio and out in the field. They are affiliate links, however, which means the channel does earn a small commission at no extra cost to you. So if you're curious what I'm shooting with, or you want to dig into my setup, that's the easiest place to find everything in one spot. Now, Canon might have 2 affordable primes on deck that fill gaps almost everyone notices when they start building out their RF kit. Daily Camera News says that Canon has shown design renders labeled as RF5518 and RF8518, with the first clear detail being that these look positioned as accessible fast primes rather than premium L series statement lenses. If these go from render to product, they would matter because Canon's RF lineup has strong high-end options but fewer straightforward mid-priced primes at classic focal lengths. Let's start with the RF55 1.8 concept. Research has framed it as a possible successor to the Nifty 50 in a modern mirrorless kit. A lens like this lives on cameras because it works for family photos, street shooting, travel, low light, indoor work without forcing you into a huge size or huge cost. Now, if Canon prices it anywhere near its existing fill of 50mm f1.8 STM, it becomes an easy default recommendation for EOS R shooters who want shallow depth of field without jumping into expensive glass. Then there's the 85-1.8 concept. Now, this one targets portrait shooters who want flattering perspective and subject separation without paying for something like the 85-1.2 or the new 1.4 VCM. Now, an f1.8 85mm has a classic value as a portrait option across systems for years because it gives you real background blur while staying manageable in size and price and gives you the compression that's really good for portraits. Now, what makes these interesting is the consistency across the focal lengths because both are labeled as f1.8s, which lines up with their existing 35-1.8 IS STM. If Canon builds out that family intentionally with 35, 55, and 85, then you get a cohesive trio that feels designed for everyday shooters instead of piecemeal releases. No mention if the 85 would support macro that we have available in the other current 85. And obviously none of this confirms release dates or final specs beyond what those renders suggest, but strategically it makes sense because affordable primes help adoption more than almost anything once people buy their first body. So if you've been waiting for an uncomplicated prime on RF that doesn't cost L series money, this is exactly the kind of signal you want to see from Canon. But speaking of primes and portrait lenses, if you want to see how I work outside the studio with my real shoots, real light, my decisions that I make in the moment, I share a lot of that work on Instagram. You'll find behind the scenes clips, finished shots, quick breakdowns that don't always make it into my longer videos, and it's the most current look at what I'm shooting and how I'm working day to day. And that link is in the description. If you shoot sports or wildlife on the RF mount, May is going to be an interesting time for you, as there might be an update coming that you might actually be able to touch. We've got multiple sources that are pointing to Canon refreshing the RF400 f2.8L IS USM and the 600 f4L IS USM, potentially in late May of this year. Canon rumor says this may arrive as a development announcement rather than an immediately shipping product, and that's going to matter because it sets expectations without locking down availability dates. It also tells you that Canon is ready to talk about the direction that they're going, even if the glass isn't necessarily ready to be on shelves. What Canon rumors also flags is how unusual it is for Super Telephoto development leaks to surface this early, which is part of why details are still thin beyond timing and general direction. One feature request sitting at the center of the conversation is built-in teleconverters on these refresh primes. Built-in extenders would give working shooters reach and flexibility without swapping accessories in dust, rain, and fast-moving situations where you can't afford to miss a moment. On the refinement side, Daily Camera News frames this as an evolutionary update rather than a clean sheet replacement. Canon already has strong glass here, so the story is modernization. Think lighter construction, updated coatings to reduce flare and lift contrast in harsh backlight, and faster communication with newer R bodies to keep autofocus locked during tracking bursts. Stabilization is a whole nother area where we can look, with expectations pointing towards stronger combined correction numbers when these lenses are paired with IBIS-capable bodies. Stock levels on current RF 600 and 400 glass have also started to look pretty tight at major retailers in some channels, though Canon rumors has cautioned that those signals are hard to read from the outside since allocations shift for reasons that are totally unrelated to launches. So if you already own the RF 400 or the 600, does this sound like an urgent replacement story? Are you shopping for this right now? Because timing can matter as much as the features when budgets and availability are unpredictable. So if you have thoughts on this and what Canon should prioritize, drop them in the comments. I want to see what working shooters land on when it comes to weight reduction versus built-in extenders versus all the other things that you might want. Now that's it for me today. If you want to support what I'm doing here, I've got memberships, super chats, gifts, all available. Also, all my links are down below. Follow me everywhere I am, including links to all the gear that I use here in the studio. Those are affiliate links. They do go to help the channel, so I appreciate that. But the easiest way to support what I'm doing here is just to hit like, subscribe, comment, and share. Those are always free, and they go a long way to helping me grow. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.